Welcome everyone to Power Rewired. I am Liza Collins.
And I am Catarina von Maydell.
Kat, it's great to chat again this week, and I've been really looking forward to this one. So we are going to talk about power, what is power, and how we embrace power without being a jerk, which I'm loving that title.
I think there's a lot of people that can benefit from it.
Oh,
And I think there's a lot of people that should benefit by it.
Exactly. So, okay, I mean, I think there's so much that we can say on this, and I know you've got some fantastic things you're going to say on it. So I'm really excited for this one. So, start off by just giving us Katarina's definition of power. What is it, and why do we need to become more cognizant of power now?
This is something I think a lot of people really don't understand is power is how we get things done. And power is everywhere. Power isn't good or bad. It's how it's used that makes it good or bad. Yeah. And I think a lot of people just sort of think power is bad and therefore they avoid it. But the reality is, if you avoid it, you're in effect giving away power to other people who are happy to take it. Nobody's going to turn down gaining power, right? Because if people are comfortable with power, they know how to use it. And then the question is, are they using it for their own benefit or sort of the greater good benefit? And ideally, we want that balance, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of now, why now? Because I think, and we've talked about this quite a lot, haven't we, in terms of we're seeing a lot of crisis, a lot of change happening at the moment, people feeling disempowered. That's the word that keeps coming up for me with the people that I work with, people feeling disempowered. And there feels like there's something about what's happening now globally, which is calling us to really think about our power and how we're using it. So are you noticing that with your clients as well?
I'm noticing it everywhere.
Yeah.
Taking it to a slightly bigger level, democracy is by the people for the people. It's not for the people. It's by the people for the people. The problem is that, and the reason I'm talking about democracy is because the process of democracy is the same process as innovation, the same process as collaboration. Everybody has to show up. Everybody has to participate. Yeah, it's a power, democracy, innovation, collaboration, any of the words that we want to use that basically mean we're creating things together. It means everybody has to show up and everybody has to learn the rules of the game.
Yeah.
But for a range of reasons, in the Western world, we've kind of taken democracy for granted. We've been trained to just go along to get along. And the people who do their MBAs, go to business school, want to become leaders, they're the ones who've been told to seize power. And the model of being obedient, showing up to work, doing what you're supposed to, get your promotions because you don't offend anybody, it has worked really well for a lot of people. And it's also really been damaging to our society. Because if you look at our education systems, our social structures, who gets promoted, it's usually the people who ruffle the least feathers, the fewest feathers, among the people who have power. It really is go along to get along. It's all about maintaining status quo. And that sounds a little bit conspiracy theory kind of thing. But I mean, really, I think it's hard to push back and honestly say that's not true. And there's so many people that are talking about it. This is not just my opinion.
Yeah.
So really where we need to go is we're kind of at the point where we've gotten everything we can from the way that we've been embracing power, but we're kind of in a crisis situation with the climate. We're in a crisis situation with oligarchs and this disparity in wealth, which equals disparity in power. And pretty well any situation that we need to address requires us to work together. Yeah. And therefore, we all have to understand what power is, how to embrace it, how to show up and play the game well, and how to do it without being completely self-serving, but at the same time not being selfless to the point of, losing what we need personally out of the situation. It again is really this balance that we need to try and get to.
Yeah. Okay. So in order to get that, how can we break that down so it's actually a bit more digestible for those of us, and me included, who had struggled with claiming? I mean, we've talked about reclaiming your power, and like you said rightly, that some people have never had it to begin with. So I think the language around that is claiming power. So how would you break that down in terms of what is power, and how we use it, to people in the population that haven't been brought up in the school system where it's encouraged you to take your power, or gone on and done an MBA? Speak to the masses, speak to speak to the people like me who hasn't necessarily gone down that route, and give us some of the tips in terms of what it is. Because I know the last 5-6 months that we've been chatting about power, I've learned so much from you, and I can see the difference in how that's been showing up in my life. And we can talk a little bit more about some of those examples afterwards.
And mine too. I mean, we're both on a similar parallel path for different reasons, but parallel path.
I mean, and I guess as well, and I guess the reason I'm asking you this question this week is because we've both been exposed to power, but you've been exposed to some really interesting power, which I think is much more overt power, whereas the power that I've seen in the NHS can be overt, but also it can be quite covert as well. So I know you've talked to me about that formal power and informal power. So yeah, could you break things down into a few of the stepping stones in terms of what that power looks like and how it shows up for us?
So what I find interesting about what you just said is overt power versus covert power. That's in how power is being used.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily where power comes from. So let's talk about where power comes from first. And you're going to have to keep bringing this back to make sure that it really is usable for people who are listening. But let's just talk about where power comes from. So most power that most people think about is formal power. I have this job, this role, and therefore I have the power to do things. But we've all worked with people, bosses, clients, whatever, where there's people who have their role power, but they're actually much more powerful than their role gives them the power. So they add informal power. And we've also worked with way too many people who have this formal power, but want to be the nice guy. And I'm going to use masculine language, but we know that women fit in this as well. So I'm not picking on men. I'm just using fast terminology.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking about one boss in particular who had quite a bit of power, but he was such a weak person. It's hard for me not to sneer. And I really have a dislike for this guy.
Yeah.
And he did what his boss, I'm going to say bosses, they weren't directly bosses, but he did what his bosses wanted him to do. And the bosses were completely self-interested.
Yeah.
And this guy went along because it was easy. And it gave him status in his community, and it gave him a good income, and he was able to derive extra income through other means, which we're not going to go into.
Yeah.
And therefore, he literally did the worst thing for his clients, the people he was supposed to serve, because he refused to use his informal power, his soft power. Yeah. But that's, again, the role power, but I've added in the mix of what his intentions were to use with the power, right?
Yeah.
So what is power? Power comes from formal structures as well as informal processes. And Cialdini, what's his name? The guy who writes about influence. He's sort of the godfather of influence. Robert Cialdini? Anyways, whatever. So influence and charisma are really sort of a secondary form of power beyond the formal power. That's sort of what people think about most, is how do you be popular? How do you be, and this is not what Cialdini writes about, but this is what people think about as influence, is being nice, going along to get along. However, influence is actually much more than that. It's a matter of really understanding, what do other people want? And how can you give other people what they want while you get what you want? And how do you sort of collaborate and work together and move towards a mutually beneficial goal or set of goals Yeah, that's what true influence is. And that's a healthy use of influence. Yeah, again,
Yeah.
the application of the power. But there's also, you can also get power from the knowledge and skills that you've got. Like, are you valuable because you can do something that other people can't? And there's a few other sources of power, that are contributing to this informal power.
Yeah, and it really resonated with me when you said about the informal power, because when I look back over my NHS career, I've had positions of formal power, but I've spent the majority, I'd say 90% of my career using informal power, and I was never taught how to do that. But as a project manager that might not have a team underneath me, I had to go to the people in the system and, as you said, highlight what was their benefit and what was my benefit in terms of how I could get them to do what I wanted them to do, that they could see the bigger picture. And I just stumbled across that, and at some stage realized what worked, what didn't work. And I guess I didn't think about that as power. I saw that as building relationships, which I suppose are relationships of power. So for me, talking about power is a relatively new language, if you like, because in the NHS, everyone's there to kind of like do things for the goodness of their heart. And we all want to kind of like add value to patients. And of course, lots of people.
Women are told that. Most men are not told that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's a very traditionally, again, not to overgeneralize, but generally that's what.
Yeah. So I guess it kind of leads on to my next question of, does power show up differently with men and women? And we are just using very just generalized, basic gender of men and women here. So, but I'm curious, does it show up differently? Because I've got a couple of experiences I can talk through where I've been curious about how things have shown up. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think it does. I think the way that we're socialized. So, generically in the Western world, and I think it's more pronounced in North America, but definitely I think in the UK, you guys will have a variation of it as well, for sure. And it's different in continental Europe, and it's a little bit more aggressive in Australia in some ways. So there's going to be regional differences. But generally, women are taught to be nurturing, caring. We're allowed to show emotion, but we're not allowed to show aggression.
Yeah.
Because then we're abrasive, then we're bitches, whatever, right? Like, I mean, there's very, very clear rules on how women are allowed to or supposed to behave. But men have just as stronger rules as well. They're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to be emotional. They're supposed to be tough. They're supposed to be independent. The way that it's expressed in each culture is going to be a little bit different, but it's pretty consistent across the Western world. This is, how men are supposed to be and how women are supposed to be.
Yeah.
And because I worked in the financial industry and I often had to get stuff done without having formal power or having a lot of resources that, which would have been formal power, I've always had to use informal power to get a lot of things done. And I always thought of myself kind of as the third sex because I didn't always play by the rules that women were supposed to. And I definitely have been called abrasive many times to my face and other words behind my back. And, it's never nice, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, but I get shit done. Right.
Yeah.
So, and because I'm willing to carry that, I think that kind of made me a little bit impervious and also gave me a bit of protection is because of my attitude. And we'll definitely have to talk about how we feel about ourselves because it makes a huge difference in how we show up in power. So I've always kind of thought of myself as the third sex. I kind of weaponize being female in some ways. And I think a lot of women in business have to. We don't have, like, it's not that we want to be like that. It's kind of like, that's how we play the game because it's the only way we're going to get what we need.
Yeah.
And most women are really trying to do things for other people. It's not self-serving. That's, so it's kind of like we're being labeled as aggressive, abrasive, whatever. And yet we're kind of helping a lot of people. Yeah. Does that kind of answer the question? That
it does, but I'd like to go a bit further into it as well and just talk through some personal examples that I know that we've both got about how this shows up with men and women in work, and also for us individually.
No names will be used.
Everything will be anonymized. So I'll just give an example for me as we've been talking and I've been learning loads from you about power. I realize that I feel like I've been coming out of a bit of a slumber of this domestication of believing I was an empowered woman, but actually, when you look at the constraints of the organization, the NHS as I was working in, actually, I wasn't really fully exercising the power that I have access to. And something happened a couple of months ago. There was a situation where I felt a definite shift with a group of colleagues that I was working with. And I felt myself shift gear and move into that space of my power. And I could feel it felt different in my body. It felt different in my voice. It felt different how I showed up. And I became part of the conversation differently. And the words that came to mind as I was reflecting about it later, and this is why I think we don't have maybe the wide enough language to talk about power, I felt ruthless. And I knew as I was thinking it, I was thinking, that's not who I am. And I know that's not how I showed up. But that's how I felt. That's the only word I could pinpoint in terms of how I felt. But I was speaking truth to power. I was speaking my own truth. I was feeling really comfortable in it. And I was making myself part of that conversation. I was not a handmaiden, which I've been pushed into very many times in my career, stood on the side. And it was a very male dominated conversation that I was part of. And I made sure my size 7 was stamped in the middle of that circle. And I got eye contact from the group. And that's why I said it felt a definite shift, me doing that. And it felt relatively easy to do. But my reflection afterwards was I felt ruthless. So I don't know what you can share about that. And I do think there's something about the language that maybe it's just me that I don't have the right language to kind of express that, or the feeling that came up.
I think we don't really have the right language, but I think it's actually more that when you're experiencing a new feeling, you don't know how to describe it because it's a new feeling. And really what you described to me before our conversation is you were stepping into your power. There was nothing ruthless about what you were doing. There was nothing, and because we don't want to go into too much detail about what the situation was, the way that you described the situation to me, there was nothing ruthless about it. You were very elegantly challenging authority, challenging assumptions, and it was done very elegantly. I think it was done very appropriately. The person who heard it wasn't used to hearing any challenges probably ever. You were describing the body language, and I'm like, you just told me that this person has never felt challenged and has been able to suppress everybody else. Like that was the body language that you told me. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you step into that new feeling of stepping into your power with comfort, and this comes back to something both you and I talk a lot about, which is our vagus nerve. We'll come back to that in a second. You really stepped into your own power in a very elegant way with a lot of comfort because you believed you were truly doing what you were expected to do in your position, right? And therefore it feels kind of ruthless because you've never had that feeling before. But there was nothing ruthless about what you actually did.
Yeah.
So what I would challenge you to do, and I have to do it for myself, and I think anybody who's listening, we have to really use the words that come to us, but then challenge the words that we've got and really think about, is this really the first time I'm feeling this? And, am I really feeling ruthless? Am I being totally self-interested at anybody else's expense? Or am I actually doing what I think is right for the greater good and right for the role that I'm here in? We have to really question ourselves on those things. So part of it is we probably need some better language than we do. But I think more so is we actually have to get comfortable with power. And then as we evolve, that's kind of when we'll be more comfortable using the language of power that already exists.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm hearing there is actually it's not just being mentally aware of that, but actually physically feeling it in our bodies, because it was that body experience. And I was there, and that was part of my role to do that. And it was for the greater good and all the rest of it. But it was just, really interesting of my internal narrative that went on around that.
And that internal narrative, sorry to jump in here, that internal narrative is ultimately where your source of power comes from, right? And it's not what we tell ourselves cognitively, you know, the mantra kind of thing, or the I will, I am, you know, whatever things people want to say to themselves. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But until you feel, genuinely feel, I deserve to be respected. I deserve to be listened to in the right contexts, right?
Yeah.
But the moment that we can genuinely feel that inside of ourselves, and we only can cultivate that by training our nervous system to do that, right? To really not just like, I'm worth it, I deserve to be respected, right? I mean, that's so cognitive and it's not in the body.
Yeah.
But the moment that it's in our body and it's like, I need to step in here. This is my responsibility to step in here. I have real value to add here that is very unique and useful and meaningful, and it will help the group get on track. Now, of course, how we do it is another discussion, but nothing starts until we truly feel it inside of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking as well, as you said that, you know, if I think back to when I hear those words, or when I've heard those words, it's a bloody shampoo advert. Isn't it the L'Oreal advert of, you know, I'm so worth it? But just to hover over that to make a point at the moment, because I don't hear that in any men's commercials.
Oh, yes, you do. It's different words.
Okay, so different words. But
so for us, it's the makeup. For women, generically, it's the makeup, it's the clothes, it's how we show up, it's the language that we use. It's like, I mean, for men, it's also about how they present themselves. But I mean, because you and I are sensitized to it, and because you have a daughter in particular, you're very sensitized to how women are being held down and then sold a bunch of window dressing stuff to make them feel powerful. But because it's still undermining the root, how we feel about ourselves, it's very clear to you and I as women how things are being weaponized against us. For men, are you driving the right car? Are you drinking the right drink? I mean, I'm being really superficial now, but all the messaging for men is, are you man enough? Yeah. It's all about, are you strong enough? You know, what's that stupid luxury car ad where it's a lion, you know, a lion walks out of his very big mansion and he's you know, he has his top, you know, Xenia suit on and whatever the most expensive watch of the day is. And, you know, all of this just in seconds, it demonstrates it. And he gets into this luxury car that purrs like a lion, and he has the head of a lion, right? And he growls at some little sound on the side of the road, you know, because it insulted his kingdom, right? And so then he can put on the noise canceling in his car so he doesn't hear anything outside of the car, probably including the people he runs over, right, when they scream. So, you know, it's just the imagery is different. The language is different because remember, we're being sold to, as women, we're supposed to be beautiful and accommodating and kind and girl power, right? But all in the right way. And men are supposed to be the lions, the, you know, the tamers of things. I
guess as well that the point I'm thinking here is that it's all so superficial. So when I think about the words, you know, I'm worth it, I've got value to add, because of those images that are constantly fed to us, it feels superficial. And what we're talking about in terms of power is how you physically feel it in your body. So I wonder then, and I guess there's probably some truth to this as we're talking it out loud, all these images and adverts that we have bombarded at us throughout our whole lives, they don't necessarily encourage us to go much more deeper than the surface, to think, oh, I'm worth it, I'll go and buy that shampoo. Oh, I'm worth it, I'll go and buy that watch. But it doesn't really call us into that space within the body. And I wonder if that's what then stops us from fully being in our power, because when we think about power and worthiness and value, it's surface level. Because like I said, when I had that experience, it was visceral. I felt it in my body. And I never had that before. And if I look back over my life, you know, I've always thought that I had value to add and that I was worthy as a human being. But again, I think that was just operating at that surface level. And I think the power that I thought I had was surface level. So I think what we're talking about here is really getting down into the sort of fascia of the body and our system, because it feels very different. Because I also, and I'll show up in a minute, but I also feel as well that when it comes to value and the value add that I have as a human being, that now feels embodied. Whereas before, that just felt surface level, stick it on a CV, talk about it. But I feel that now, and it feels different.
Yeah. Just for the record, you don't have to shut up now because you have something valuable to say.
Of course. Yes, of course. I need to practice what I'm preaching.
Going back to the commercials, you know, the shampoo, the cars, the whatever, all of that, the underlying message in all of the commercials, and again, I'm kind of overstating everything, but there's a lot of truth to this, is all about you need to use the right shampoo because you're not good enough. You need to drive the car because nobody will recognize you because you're not worthwhile until you have the car. Everything is, how do you layer on commercial products to show that I'm good enough?
Yeah.
And that's why we have these rapacious oligarchs where it's never enough, because it doesn't matter how many signals of their power they've got, it's never enough. Yeah. And every aspect of our society is reinforcing that. And that is part of the power game. That's part of the toxic power game. A healthy power game is what parents do, where they're really teaching their kids to stand on their own 2 feet, recognize their strengths, cultivate their strengths, work with others, build relationships that are trusting and loving, and build relationships that are functional and transactional, right?
Yeah.
And knowing the difference between the two.
Yeah.
That's what healthy power looks like, is one where we build a good life for ourselves, but that good life includes being part of a healthy community.
Yeah.
But the way that a lot of power is exercised, it's a transactional game where it's a zero-sum game. It's about, in order for me to become more powerful, I have to reduce your power. That's kind of how power is played in most organizational settings. And there's a range of reasons that happens. And of course, it's not all the time everywhere. And it depends on specific people and group cultures and things like that. But generally, it's a zero-sum game. For me to gain power, I have to take it away from you, or you have to lose it in some way, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious about, go back to the advertising stuff. So I'm then making an assumption, if all the advertising is telling us that we need to have X, Y, and Z in order to be powerful, have value, and have meaning, and all the rest of it, that they're already working from a baseline that we don't feel that we have that. So have they, and my assumption, as I'm saying this out loud, is that that's been programmed into us since childhood through maybe school structures, advertising when we were younger. Because it doesn't feel, I guess what I'm trying to say, it doesn't feel like the advertising has to work that hard, because the message is, if you have this, you will be better. So where's the message of you're crap anyway to begin with? And where does that come from? Because that's the bit that I'm trying to understand, because I guess as I'm speaking it out loud, I'm thinking it has to come from within those structures within society. What's your thoughts about that?
So there is
empowerment, isn't it?
So the culture, a great definition I heard of culture the other day is, it is a collective response to our environment. Yeah. So culture changes as the environment changes, and the environment changes as culture changes. So it's kind of like a symbiotic back and forth. Yeah. And then we have to recognize there's global cultures, there's national cultures, regional cultures, etc. So if we recognize there's global cultures, national cultures, regional cultures, etc., all of those things are at play, and they're constantly in dynamic flux. They're always moving, changing, because the dynamics between things are changing all the time. The way that we show up is that everybody is constantly in the soup of culture and the zeitgeist and everything that's going on, but we're also products of our family and our historical families. Yeah. So in more traditional cultures, there's this idea of, oh, this family is the implication is genetically superior because they're always winning.
Yeah.
And there's other people who are considered genetically inferior. It's never, nobody ever uses those words, but that's kind of the implication, because they're always losing, or they're always the working class, or they're always, you know, the lower levels. But really what it boils down to is, how are we indoctrinated with our families? How are we educated with our families? How are we educated in the schools and the communities that we grow up in? Very local. Yeah. I grew up with technically refugee parents. Technically they were immigrant parents, but they were kind of more refugee parents. So they kind of showed up, and there was a lot of discrimination against them, blah, blah, blah. So they kind of grew up with this sense of just be quiet and go along. There's more to it than that. I'm kind of oversimplifying.
Yeah.
And then I also grew up in a very kind of factory town, but there was also a lot of entrepreneurship as well. So I was very lucky that I grew up more on the entrepreneurial, upward mobility kind of side of the river. You know, so I was a little bit more indoctrinated into, you have more choices, but the other people who lived on the working side of the river, you know, there was the union neighborhoods that were pretty high income, and then there was the non-union neighborhoods, which were pretty low income. Yeah. And they had completely different, like their personalities were different. They were really distinct. You know, when we talked about West Side High School, everybody knew that is the non-union working class. They're obedient until they're not, but they're angry. And this is like a long time ago, right? And then you've got the union high school, where everybody's parents are in the union. They have good incomes. They take nice holidays, but they're very obedient to the system because the system works for them. And then there's the management and entrepreneurial side of the river. And we weren't really taught sort of an entrepreneurial way of thinking, but we also weren't really taught to be subservient. Yeah. So if you layer on, you know, the family ethos that you inherit and you grow up in, the school and local community you grow up in, and you can sort of see there's multiple layers, and all of them will color you. And even though you can have several siblings growing up in almost the same environments, there's just little things where, you know, maybe somebody says something to one sibling and it hits because they're kind of feeling vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable at that moment. And that shapes them on what they hear and see, and it sends their life in a totally different trajectory, right?
Yeah.
Than the other sibling who maybe never got that cutting comment, or maybe they got a more positive reinforcement in different ways. So, you know, even within families, you can have divergence in where people go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to share quite a funny little story, actually, and I wanted to find out if you had a similar experience to this, because it talks to power within professional structures and how that shows up in the workplace. Obviously, I come from an NHS background, a lot of hierarchy around different professions. And within healthcare, of course, you know, doctors, consultants are always seen as like the top of the tree. And as I've been on this journey with you and talking about power, I've often thought back to this experience that I observed. And it was part of a very large conference. And there was a senior clinician that was part of this panel that was talking, and they got asked a question, which was a really simple question. And it was asking the question in such a way as to, how can we do things differently rather than wait for harm to show up? All right. So, you know, typical question in healthcare, because we know when it comes to healthcare, we know what the complaints are. Right, we know what they are, but we really often go upstream and look at the root causes of these and put interventions there, rather than just wait for this to happen and then to show up and apologize. And what was really fascinating, and the observation of the individual versus the audience, this individual was asked the question, and one, they looked like they were completely unprepared for such a simplistic question, given the gravity of their position and their standing. They should have been on top of that. The words almost dribbled out of their mouth, like they could be hardly bothered to even say it. Like there was almost like an annoyance that they had to even answer. And the audience just took it. That was that thing. You know, like with the Emperor's New Clothes. I felt like I was the child that's going like, you've got no clothes on. You know, like pointing out the bleeding obvious. And it was absolutely fascinating. And quite often now, when I think about power and just where we are in society, I keep using the word domesticated, because I feel like so many of us have been domesticated. And what I just observed in that conference that day was how domesticated everybody was, and how they accepted the response from that person, which was barely more than a dribble.
Mhm.
And it was totally unacceptable, but they accepted it. And that's what just made me think, there's no power. Well, not that there's no power in this room. There was power in that room from that individual, and nobody was prepared to challenge them and point out the bleeding obvious by saying, one, you're talking a load of crap, and two, come on, where's the solutions? Because we're talking about humans being harmed here. So have you had any experience like that? Because it was an eye.
So I think everybody's had experiences like that. And it's the experience of, because we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was really the answer that you got, but you got it with a sneer. Yeah. You got it with a dismissiveness of, you got it with a dismissiveness. And often when you have people in power who are dismissive of the people who are asking, why are you wearing no clothes questions?
Yeah.
They have their own status to protect. Like if you think about that person that you're thinking about and everyone that I'm thinking about, they did work hard and they did have to fight hard to get to their positions, right? And they don't want to give it up. They don't want to give up their status. They don't want to give up their income. They don't want to give up the fact that they figured out the game as it is, and they could ride out the rest of their career. As long as the rules don't change, they're going to have a good life, to get to retirement. And it's not only in employed situations. You definitely see that in the consulting world. It's probably even more protected there because there's more money at stake and more upsides. Yeah. If you protect the status quo, you can make a lot of money. And that's basically what most people are doing, is choosing self-interest. I want the job. I want the money. I want the status. That's what most people are choosing.
Yeah.
So there's definitely I'm going to call it nefarious. I don't know if that's the right term, but it's kind of like there's a really kind of almost toxic element to that and you can see that in the climate world, is there's a lot of people who are like, we're making a lot of money from the way things are. And if there's not enough public pressure for us to change how we're doing things, why would we voluntarily give up our status and our income? But then there's a whole bunch of people. Do you need to do that, or?
Yeah, I'm going to switch my phone. Apologies for that.
Yeah, it's all good. Just hopefully it wasn't one of your kids. That was the key thing I was concerned about. So there's sort of the negative side to it, where there's self-interest, and we all have to be self-interested. And the people who don't claim their power enough, they need to be told, you must be self-interested, because nobody's going to look out for you. Nobody's going to help you get to where you deserve to be and get what you deserve to get for the contributions that you're making.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole bunch of people who are with power who actually want to make a change. And you and I both have a number of people like that in our lives over our careers, where they have the power, they have the status, and they're like, I know things need to change, but I don't know how to do it. Right.
Yeah.
And the problem for them is, if they start challenging the status quo, they put their own status at risk, because they're challenging the system that allows them to have this formal power and the resources they have access to, and the networks and everything else. So they have to challenge the status quo, but it goes even deeper than that. They have to start challenging their own beliefs and their own identities, right? And then they have to start recognizing, oh my God, I've been part of the problem and I've done some really horrible things, maybe not necessarily hurting people intentionally, but simply by the decisions I made, I hurt people when I didn't necessarily have to. Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of resistance. There's going to be a lot of resistance because people have to change if they want to become change makers. Yeah. And that's something that I think we need to support people much better, and not disempower them or attack them. I mean, it's so easy for people to attack someone and say, oh, they knew it all along that they were causing harm.
Yeah.
As long as it wasn't illegal or intentional or whatever, we actually have to be more graceful and support people in that environment, right?
Yeah.
And that's a useful way of, like, we have to kind of protect people as well. And we have to use our power to protect the people who are genuinely trying to make change.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to our original question for the start of this podcast, in terms of how do we reclaim our power without being a jerk, what are your top 3 things that you want to leave people with?
Yeah, start internally and really start learning about power. And those are kind of connected. Yeah, just start learning about power. Start paying attention to power and listen to what your body is telling you. Yeah. So, what most people, and when I really started paying attention to power and how I squandered my power and how people used it, whether they were using it beneficially for other people or just beneficially for themselves, and really starting to be able to separate who has power and uses it well and uses it for what I believe to be the right reasons, which is self-interest plus social benefit or collective benefit, versus the people who have power and didn't, were only self-interested. And when I looked at people who had power but chose not to use it, really start just paying attention and categorizing who different people are, what they look like.
Yeah.
Really pay attention to how do they use their power? How do they acknowledge their power? How do they build their power? How do they learn about power? And as we do that and read, like do reading, like figure out and listening to podcasts and whatever to educate yourself on how to use power, where does power come from? And there's a million different, we don't always talk about it in terms of the word power. It could be influence, it could be making change, it could be whatever. There's many ways to talk about power. But the key thing is really listen to yourself while you're sort of paying attention. Because when I started paying attention, it was always like, they're a jerk, right? And all of a sudden, when I started listening or paying more attention and starting to question, are they really being a jerk? Then I realized, no, I'm just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to change how I do things, right? So some of the resistance was legitimate. Some of
Yeah.
the resistance was self-protection. I don't want to be the change, I don't want to have to step up and take responsibility. And part of it was also insecurity. I didn't know what I was really capable of because I hadn't challenged myself to really step into my power. And therefore, I had to also do a lot of learning in terms of what am I capable of and how do I really contribute in ways that are going to be most meaningful. So that's number one. And then start hanging out with people who are willing to have these conversations with you. Yeah. I'm going to boil it down to 2 things. And really just build a peer group of people that you can have honest conversations with, like really trusted people, and sort of a small group of, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 other people, where you really are nurturing each other and peer coaching each other to really step up and understand and question yourself, question others. Yeah. What would you suggest?
Well, I guess just before that, it's speaking to the fact that we're doing this podcast, we're creating a community. So even just asking us some questions, asking the people who are joining this community, I think that would be a safe place to start as well, wouldn't it? And I guess using the experience that I've had of me stepping into that place of embodying that power, I suppose and I think you probably mentioned this, but it's encouraging everyone to get comfortable with what that feels like in the body and notice when you've done something different, how that shows up, what that feels like. You might have limited wording like I felt like I had, to reflect on how that felt, because that feels like an important part of the process as well. And I guess it goes back to what I hear you talk about quite often, that entrepreneurial mindset, certain spirit of constantly testing and reevaluating. And it feels a bit like that as well. How can we, all of us, test it, reevaluate, take the learning, test it again? And part of the how it feels, how it shows up, the language that we're using to reflect on it is part of that experimentation as well. And I guess, what am I trying to say on this bit? I've noticed, and I've noticed this with other people as well, when I've tried to step into that position of power, I've sometimes overstepped the mark. So it's like, how do you find that tolerance of that it's just right, and you don't come across as being aggressive or subservient? And I don't know if I'm using even the right words for that, but you know what I mean? It's like, as you're stepping into those moments of power, I know when I look back over the years, I've stepped too far in, if that makes sense. And then I've had to moderate and kind of pull back. And that's because I was trying to work out where my tolerance is for that healthy power. So I think that would be my key takeaway.
And be gracious with yourself. Like when you're genuinely trying to do the right thing, whatever, I mean, the right thing, it's such a cliche thing to say. And we have to even question ourselves, what do we think is the right thing and why do we believe it's the right thing? Because a lot of times how we even define what the right thing is isn't really the right thing, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of have to get into this habit of questioning everything and testing all the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you think about the people with power and why they resist challenges is because they've been taught, and this is sort of the masculine code, you have to be right all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're not right, you blame somebody else. You don't take responsibility for it because it's unmasculine to do that in the sort of in this narrow code of what the language is that men get, right? So
Yeah.
for men to shift into experimentation is even harder. So men with power, men in general, people with power, it's really hard to shift into an experimentation mode because it kind of undermines how they even got, power in the first place.
Yeah.
And even women with power have a hard time with this because the way that women get power is by being right. Yeah. Because it's considered weak to say, I don't know, let's try it. But that's exactly what we need to step into. So but you have to know how to use power in order to do that effectively, right? And
Yeah.
then we have to be gracious with ourselves when we overstep and, forgive ourselves for it, learn from it, like debrief, really think about why did I overstep? What did I miss? And then how can I do it better next time? And also when you understep as well, like when you're not stepping forward enough, you have to do the same thing for yourself as well. And of
Yeah.
course, if you hurt other people or embarrass other people, there has to be an apology done the right way, right? If you're embarrassing somebody with power publicly, you then have to acknowledge it publicly. It has to be done. There's rules to how you apologize. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you do have to recognize if you do hurt somebody, then you have to make the right amends for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have to accept that we're always going to be having to apologize for things when we go into experimentation. And the more that we can sort of collectively accept that this is kind of, it's like puppies playing. Puppies play not just because they want to play. Puppies are playing because they're learning how to survive. They're learning how to fight. They're learning their bodies. They're learning how to make things happen, right? And puppies will bite too hard, and then you hear the squeak of, you hit, yeah. And it's kind of like, oh, sorry, and you learn, okay, I'm not supposed to bite somebody's ear that hard when we're playing. If I want to hurt them, then yes. But, right, so we have to take this playful approach and recognize that there will be proverbial bloody noses periodically. And the goal is not to create the bloody noses. The goal is to avoid them, but that's part of the game.
Yeah. And I guess what came to mind as you were speaking was that as humans, when we do that, there's often ego involved. So ego is equally present when we overstep, if we're not doing it for the right reasons, and understepping. And quite often people don't think that's got ego attached to it, but the subservient is also kind of part of the ego. And I guess as I was thinking then, what's the antidote to that? And I think it is coming from that place of curiosity. So it is about curiosity, learning, and you're right. Going back to the puppy analogy, we are going to do that, and that's part of that natural experimentation and play. But if it's done in a way where it's psychologically safe, all the buzzwords, then it is a place for experimentation and curiosity. So we could talk about this forever, Catarina. I know. I'm going to pull things to a close. Is there anything else that you want to add to what we've talked about today? And I think we'll probably, obviously, the whole podcast is about power and rewiring power. So we will come back to this in lots of different ways. But is there anything that you want to leave people with today?
Yeah. Just jump in. Just try it. Power is not bad. And in fact, power, it's everybody's responsibility to step into their power.
Yeah.
And it starts by feeling like a responsibility. It starts by feeling onerous, but actually, like you discovered, with some of your experiences, I didn't talk about mine so much, but I've had very similar experiences to what you've told me over the last few months. Is
Yeah.
when you step into your power, it's actually a lot more fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's fun. And once we get to that point where it's fun, and of course, fun requires work and everything else, but
Yeah.
yeah, just start taking responsibility for yourself and start figuring out how you can have a lot more fun and be more impactful in a meaningful way.
Amazing. On that note, I'm going to put it to a close. So it's been great chatting with you today. If anybody has any questions or like what we spoke about today and want us to talk about anything else around power, please let us know, comment below. And we'll put our links below as well in terms of our LinkedIn profiles if you want to connect with us individually. But yeah, it's been another great conversation, Kat. So thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Liza. I really appreciate it. See you later. Bye-bye.
Take care.